afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the February 3rd, 2026 meeting of the Finance Committee. It's our first time in the council chambers, so part of the new changes for 2026. All right, so may I get a roll call, please?
Yes, we'll start with Committee Member Harmon.
Here.
Chair Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Santamaria is not present.
Great. First, before we go on, is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to any item not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee? Not seeing any in chambers. Is there anybody online?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
Okay, we will close general public comment and we will turn it over to our item for today. That's going to be Mr. DiMartini kicking it off for us.
Thank you so much, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Keith DiMartini. I'm the Finance Director for the city. And it's my pleasure to present this topic today, which is I'm just going to pull up the PowerPoint here, which is to discuss the results from a local poll that was conducted regarding options for local funding. The committee may recall that we took this item along with a host of other budget balancing options to the Finance Committee back in October of 2025. Staff has done quite a lot of work at looking at different ways to generate additional revenue as well as control and reduce some of our expenditures to help us balance our budget. We are facing an approximate $6 million general fund operating deficit in this current fiscal year 2026, and that deficit grows to $10.4 million in fiscal year 2027. We're currently in the budget development process right now for fiscal year 2027, and that will be presented and issued to you in April of this current fiscal year. And so we got the city council direction in the meeting in December to go ahead and pursue a public opinion poll related to a couple of tax measures. And so we're very happy to have Adam from FM3 Research to present an overview of the poll results to the Finance Committee today. This is the same firm that the city has used on a number of occasions over the last couple of years related to public opinion research and specifically related to potential tax revenue measures. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Great. Thanks, Keith. And I don't have a view of the slides. I don't know if that's possible to set up for me, or I can just, I have the slides and I'm happy to speak to them if that's helpful. If we could go to the methodology slide, that slide you have up there now. So just to give everybody a sense of how we did this project, it was a survey done December 4th to the 11th of last year, so before the holiday season, speaking to likely November 2026 voters in the city. So that means they're people that have a past voting history that would make them likely to show up in an upcoming election. We don't have a crystal ball to know exactly which people in the city are going to vote in that election a year from now, or if certain external events are going to drive turnout from certain groups more than others. So our best guess is to look at past historical trends on that. From that group, we did 520 survey interviews. We had a margin of error for questions asked of everybody of just about plus or minus 4.5. We tested two different ballot measures, and so we're looking at the half sample margin of error being important there. In there, the margin is a little bit larger. It's basically plus or minus 6. We reached people a few different ways. We did phone calls with live telephone interviewers on cell phones and landlines. We also sent emails and text messages for people to take the survey online. And the online survey is not like one of the ones that shows up on Facebook or Nextdoor and you could take it 20 times or send it to your friends who live in a different city. This is protected, so each person who receives the link can only take it once. As Keith mentioned, we've had the pleasure of working for the city a few different times now, in 2017 and then twice leading up to the 2024 election. We made the survey available in English and Spanish, and you might see something that doesn't quite add up to 100% because we've rounded decimal points. We could go to the next slide. And beyond there, just to the next one as well, to look at the general perceptions of the city. Here's a really important question as it relates to any finance measure or revenue measure, and that is, do your voters perceive that you need additional funding? We find a consistent level of a majority who perceive that the city either has a great need or some need for additional funding. That's right around the level you were at in May of last year when the council voted to put a measure on the ballot. If there's any warning sign there, you see a 24% no real need. That number has increased, although it's also not an apples to apples comparison. We've got the May 2024 and 2023 surveys were done with voters who likely to vote in a presidential election. So a little younger, a little more ideologically liberal than those who would vote in a gubernatorial election. We could go to the next slide. Here and on the next couple slides, we wanted to get a sense from your voters of what they consider to be the most serious problems. Obviously, we were looking at measures related to funding housing, and so how does that stack up with other issues? Well, cost of housing is a very strong #1 serious problem in Santa Barbara in the minds of your voters, with 66% who consider that an extremely serious problem. That's the dark red bar there. In total, 81% who would consider it either extremely or very serious, and very few voters who would consider it to be not a problem. Cost of living is also a high level of problem and obviously related to cost of housing, although the intensity there is not as high. Notice, though, when we talk about it in terms of housing affordability and the lack of affordable housing, still a high level of concern, but that extremely serious problem number is 25 points lower. Not the only issues that voters are concerned about. In addition to housing, it's also the number of vacant storefronts in downtown, the number of homeless people in Santa Barbara, wildfires, natural disasters, short-term rental conversions, lack of good-paying jobs. These are all issues that, a half or more than half of voters are concerned about. If we go to the next slide, here we're getting things that are under a majority that voters are concerned about. At the top of this list, the impact of federal and state budget cuts on local services. A little less than half are really worried about that, and a larger percentage in that gray box that don't know. And then we've just highlighted for you down near the bottom that the amount you pay in local taxes and fees is not considered to be a very serious problem right now, which does bode well for the potential for a measure that you don't have that as an overriding concern right now. And then if we go to the final slide in this section, the next one, issues related to discussion about a TOT, which could be the impacts of tourism on residents' quality of life or the condition of the local tourism economy. Very low rating in terms of those levels of concern. And then in addition, because in addition to the housing measures, we tested a library funding measure. The condition of local public libraries is the lowest level of concern. Only 7% who would consider that to be extremely or very serious as a problem. Not to say they're not thinking of the library at all, but they don't think there's an issue with the condition of local libraries. If we go to the next slide, and then the one that follows it, here we're going to talk about not what the problems are, but how do they want the city to use its revenues, and what are the services provided by the city and aspects of city budgeting that they think are most important to them. Now, we know that when our charge was to test measures related to housing and library funding, we wanted to get a feel for what some of the other priorities are. And what we found is, even though some issues around public safety and others were lower levels of concern, they are very high on the list of importance in the minds of voters. So maintaining fire and paramedic response was the #1 at 91%, extremely or very important. Go down a couple items, you see keeping public areas safe and clean at 89, maintaining 911 emergency response at 87, with the largest percentage who would say it's extremely important to them. Keeping neighborhood fire stations opened and staffed. These are all public safety related items that are very strong as priorities. Also retaining and attracting local businesses at 89%, local drinking water sources at 81, as well as broadly maintaining essential city services at 80%. Now, there are items related to housing and housing affordability that are a little bit below some of those more general fund kinds of priorities, improving housing affordability for Santa Barbara's workforce being the strongest, at 79% who consider that extremely or very important. If we go to the next slide, here we have maybe the next tier of priorities where we're in the mid-70s on almost all of these, with the extremely important numbers now more like the mid-30s to the low 40s. Some other items here like maintaining quality of life, supporting local small businesses, broadly speaking, maintaining the city's long-term financial stability. You also start to see a little bit of the police side of public safety here and maintaining police response. And then a couple of items that interplay with a housing revenue measure, which is addressing or preventing homelessness. We tried different language to see if one felt more important to people than another, but those two terms tested statistically the same. You can keep going. And then the last tier at sort of the highlight level of priorities, these are ones that are around 2/3 up to 70%. Housing affordability for working class and low income families and individuals is a very high level of extremely importance, but less universal sort of importance compared to some of the other items that were in the 90s. You've got the condition of city parks, condition of downtown, youth services, services for the disabled. Another way we looked at reducing homelessness, as well as services for veterans down near the bottom. This question that we tested had a number of items, including some that we're not going to go into now. But if you go to the next slide, we compiled all of the priorities that we tested related to housing funding and just put them here in a single slide to make it a little bit easier to find those and follow those. As I mentioned, the affordability for the workforce being the number one, affordability for working class and low-income families and individuals. The second, if we're going to housing, emergency, the addressing, preventing, reducing homelessness, all high priorities, as well as you can see supportive housing, transitional housing on the lower end, relatively speaking. So that's a bunch of context of how people see what's going on in the city and how they rate elements of the city budget. If we go to the next slide, and then the one that follows that, you'll get the housing funding ballot questions that we tested in the survey. Mentioned we did two options. On the left, you've got a transient occupancy tax, a TOT, or a hotel motel tax, where we tested an increase from 12% to 14%, which would raise approximately $5.8 million. On the right-hand side, you've got a property transfer tax, which was described as levying $9.50 per $1,000 real property sales and transfers over $3 million only, and that would provide $5.1 million. We tried to do our best to keep the rest of these as matching as we could, so that we're really focused on the funding mechanism differences. And we used many of the phrases you just saw on the last slide to describe the ways that funding could be used to address housing affordability and homelessness in the city. And then at the end, you can see we included some fiscal accountability provisions that we know are important to voters. They've been in your past measures as well. Audits, public spending disclosure, all funds used locally. So if we go to the next slide, you'll get the initial reaction to these two ballot questions. On the left, you can see the transient occupancy tax, TOT, is at 57 to 31, with 12% who are unsure how they would vote. That's a good number for a majority vote measure, but unfortunately, since this would be a special tax, it would require a 2/3 threshold, and it doesn't reach that number to start. On the property transfer tax, a much higher percentage of people who are not sure. We've got 42% saying yes, 33% saying no, 26% who are unsure, and that reflects, I think, the less familiarity maybe with that measure, how it would be, how it actually works for them, things like that. It's a little more complicated for people to wrap their heads around than a TOT, which just says, hey, you're not going to pay it. It's going to be paid by hotel and motel guests, and people kind of check that box and move on. The transfer tax requires a little more thought and consideration. If we go to the next slide, we didn't just test these once. We also wanted to provide people with information about the measures and help them understand why the city could be considering them and what the impacts could be from these measures. And several statements were impactful with about 2/3 of voters, right? We need to, in order to see a viable measure, need to be able to move that level of support up over 2/3. We would need more than 2/3 of people to find these statements to make them more inclined to favor the measure. Several of them hit that mark. One that's very similar to the individual priorities we'd looked at earlier was about workforce housing and making sure essential workers can afford to live in the city. And we also saw one that resonated well about families that are forced to move because of rent increases, and sometimes parents can't keep their kids in the same school district and they've got to move and gets those kids behind. Unlocking the potential for millions of dollars in existing state and federal matching funds was something that resonated for voters, as well as the challenges related to homelessness in Santa Barbara and the ways that this measure could help support some services that address it. If we go to the next slide, continuing in the same question, on the TOT measure, we reminded people that the measure doesn't increase taxes on local residents. It's just paid by out-of-town visitors. That also resonated fairly well. The accountability provisions I mentioned earlier tried to put some context around the extreme financial hardship that many people face trying to rent a home in Santa Barbara. That was okay. These are sort of softly okay as messages, right? They're not super strong in terms of voters' response, but you get some reaction to them. On the next slide, the last of the statements that we tested, just the need for affordable housing being one of the biggest challenges facing residents in the city. The waiting list of many people who are looking for affordable housing. On the transfer tax, pointing out that the measure is designed to be fair and have no impact on cost of living for residents. It only applies when a home is sold, and only those selling very expensive homes contribute more. That did not resonate as strongly. Right? We saw the TOT statement about out-of-towners paying more resonating at a higher level than this one did. And then lastly, saying that the measure is going to prevent cuts because otherwise you need to find other revenue sources to accomplish the same goals was the least impactful of the messages that we tested. So if you go to the next slide, I can show you the impacts of those statements. And there's some interesting developments here on the left-hand side. That TOT measure doesn't really change very much when people hear those statements. It goes from 5731 to 5928. But hearing the transfer tax ballot measure a second time, we find a dramatically different response, where now it's at 61 to 28 with just 11% who are undecided. So the bulk of those undecided voters moved to the yes side, and some of those no voters dropped down from 33 to 28. Could be the fact that they heard some of that messaging about who would pay and who wouldn't, but also just a second chance to hear that message and hear who the measure would apply to may be part of what drove some of those differences. However, in neither case do these measures get to the 2/3 threshold that's needed for this kind of measure if the city is going to put it on the ballot. There's a lot of growth, particularly on the transfer tax, but it's still short of the 2/3. If we go to the next slide, we always want to make sure that we're providing the city with the context of what could happen if there's some organized opposition that works against the measure and tries to provide the other side of the story and reasons why voters should oppose it. So we summarize some of those arguments. On the TOT, it has almost no impact. It starts at 57%. We provided information from the city's perspective. It barely moved to 59, drops down a couple points after opposition. On the transfer tax side, though, we can see a sharper movement up and then a sharper movement back down. So it finishes at 50 to 32 with about 17% who are undecided. So again, neither of them reaching 2/3. That transfer tax just gets 50% after simulating some significant opposition. If we go to the next slide, just to give you the historical context, you probably remember your Measure I ballot measure passed at 63-37. We did 2 surveys testing that potential measure. On the left was the baseline survey, closer to kind of where we are now in terms of the context. That was, although it was done in May of the year before the measure was on the ballot. There we saw it ending at about 62% after opposition. Then we did a follow-up survey just before council voted to put the measure on the ballot. Support was a little softer to begin with. It looked like it could be vulnerable if there was intense opposition, which my understanding, although I wasn't as engaged at that point, is that didn't really materialize. And your final numbers were closer to that vote after information, the city making an effort to communicate without facing the robust opposition, and your results came out in that window at 63-37. We did, if we go to the next slide, put a library measure in front of people as well. This would be for maintaining library hours, services, educational programs, accessibility for residents of all ages, as well as some physical upgrades and repairs, technology, homework help for children and teens, keeping qualified librarians. This was tested as a $49 parcel tax with 3% annual adjustments for $1.3 million. If you go to the next slide, you can see the results there. This measure would also need a 2/3 level of support, and it's not there, at least on just this initial ask. 41% said that they would vote yes, 36% say they would vote no, and notice that definitely no is even a couple points higher than the definitely yes. A large number of voters undecided. We didn't have the opportunity in the survey to explore detailed messaging on this measure, but we did see in some of the earlier questions just a low sense of need for funding for the library, and relatively speaking, not as much of a priority as some of the other things that we talked about in the survey, and it seems unlikely that that is viable for this election cycle. So if we go to the next slide and then the one that follows, just quickly a couple of conclusions. We see a majority, but not quite 2/3, who continue to think that the city needs additional funding. Addressing housing affordability is a major priority for city voters, but ballot measure focused only on that issue and funded either by a TOT or a property transfer tax at this point doesn't really have sufficient support to get to the 2/3 level that's required. Both of the measures benefit at least somewhat from a dedicated informational effort, but just don't get to that level and fall well below when we simulate organized opposition. As I just mentioned, a library parcel tax seems unlikely to be successful. One option we just wanted to illuminate and bring forward, we didn't test it in the survey, so we're doing some interpretation of data here. A general purpose TOT and perhaps even a transfer tax measure has a chance of being viable in that we saw that there was high prioritization of elements of the city's budget that aren't housing related, that are public safety and supporting local businesses and addressing environmental concerns. And those were even higher than some of the housing priorities, and on a TOT measure, we were in the high 50s throughout the survey on something that maybe was a lower priority than some of the things that were not included. If we go to the next slide, just lastly, the concerns in the city that are top of mind for this group of voters, the cost of housing, the lack of affordable housing, cost of living, as well as the number of vacant storefronts downtown and homelessness. Top priorities for funding include, as I mentioned, some elements of public safety, retaining and attracting local businesses, protecting local drinking water supplies, and then in the mix as well as the improving workforce housing affordability. There are some other priorities related to housing that are significant for voters, addressing, preventing, reducing homelessness, including the emergency homeless services and shelter, and then affordability for working class and low-income families and individuals. So that's the end of the survey report, and happy to take questions.
And I'm just going to make some concluding comments, and then we'll turn it back over to the committee. Although we didn't identify a staff recommendation on this slide, our staff recommendation would be that the Finance Committee direct us to pursue looking at a real property transfer tax and adding that to the November ballot. What that would entail is some general information sessions, information outreach to the community, outreach and engagement with a number of our stakeholders to figure out, who could kind of assist in that information effort. And then I think we would want to probably do a tracking poll again, kind of right before the council would consider putting this on the ballot, which would be in June. And so at that point, we know that the TOT polls very successfully, but I think there are some other economic considerations and concerns that about bringing forth the TOT at this point. And with both of the measures appearing to be successful, after information to the public, at this point, we would recommend at least pursuing the real property transfer tax further. And so I think, there's still a lot to do between now and June, but I do think this is good news in terms of being able to put together additional revenue. Obviously, one of the concerns is that it doesn't appear to pass the 2/3 threshold for a special tax dedicated to housing. So outreach with our housing stakeholder groups and figuring out kind of what does that mean in terms of creating more funding for housing that, and that's conversations that we can have over the coming months with our stakeholder groups. So with that is our staff recommendation, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to change it up just a little bit, the order. Last week at the council workshop, we are interested in having public comment on the items before we do our questions and deliberation. So I'm going to do public comment first, and then we'll open it up. You can do questions, comments out there. So we're going to test it out here at Finance first to see how it works. And so I have, three speakers, but Lisa Carlos, you're donating to Rob Fredericks. So I'll have Mr. Fredericks, if you want to come on up. And you'll have 4 minutes. And then followed by Kathy Janega-Dykes. And if there's anybody else that wants to speak, please put slip in, and then we'll go to online after that. Mr. Fredericks, floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Friedman and members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for the review of the polling analysis, and I would like to offer a few observations from the perspective of the Housing Authority, which is the backbone of our community's affordable housing delivery system. The polling confirms what most of us already know. Housing affordability is the top concern in Santa Barbara. The cost of housing, lack of affordable housing, and the cost of living dominate voters' concerns, and improving housing affordability, especially for the local workforce, is among the city's highest. Importantly, the city's adopted housing element commits us, under Goal 8, to identifying a dedicated, reliable funding source for affordable housing. This needs to go beyond the inclusionary in lieu fees that do not even come close to meeting the funding needs. We've been trying to backfill the loss of the consistent RDA affordable housing funding ever since its dissolution, with increasingly dwindling and unpredictable sources of revenue. Additionally, the polling adds a needed reality check. A city-led specific tax for affordable housing would require a 2/3 vote, and the survey shows that threshold would be extremely difficult to reach by November 2026, especially once the opposition messaging begins. While a citizen-led housing tax measure would only require a simple majority, the community is effectively out of time to qualify, fundraise, and carry out such a campaign. I appreciate that the polling injects realism into the discussion, but the polling data is clear. Qualifying and passing a 2/3 tax measure by November 2026 will be difficult. The survey shows that clearly. Even well-framed housing-focused measures fall short of the threshold once opposition messaging is introduced. I would like to pause and say that, one question in my mind is, who did the survey reach? If it's reaching more more wealthy individuals, their response on the questions of does affordability matter would be lower. So there is that. But this reality of the polling should not paralyze, but should inform our next steps. What will not be productive or fiscally prudent is repeating what we just lived through with Measure I. Uncertainty as to funding and annual fights over general fund allocations, and capacity-strained nonprofit developers forced into protracted negotiations just to keep projects alive. That approach is inefficient, unstable, and frankly inconsistent with how you responsibly finance long-term infrastructure or housing. If the city is serious about housing, and as the polling suggests voters are, then we need to move away from episodic discretionary funding toward more predictable ongoing revenue that can be leveraged. At the end of the day, this isn't about whether housing is a priority. The polling and housing element already answer that. The real question for the Finance Committee and eventually City Council is whether the city continues to manage housing funding through short-term discretionary decisions, or whether we finally put a disciplined, predictable financing structure in place that allows us to plan, leverage outside dollars, and deliver results From a fiscal stewardship standpoint, the latter is the responsible path. Finally, in closing, if any revenue measure moves forward, general or otherwise, I strongly recommend that it include a citizens oversight committee modeled after the Measure C structure. Transparency, audits, and public accountability consistently test well with voters and are essential for long-term trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Up next, Kathy Janega-Dykes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Kathy Janega-Dykes. I'm President and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. First and foremost, thank you for all the hard work that you do to make Santa Barbara such a desirable place to work, visit, as well as live. I'm here today as part of the broader conversation you're going to be having regarding the recent polling results and certainly the choices ahead of you as you consider the city's future budget and potential revenue options, including a potential increase to the transient occupancy tax. And to help inform that discussion, Visit Santa Barbara commissioned an independent economic impact study to really evaluate the impacts of a TOT increase. And we've shared the result of that study with you all last week, as well as an executive summary, because we believe that all of these decisions should be grounded in data. And the analysis shows that while a higher TOT rate may generate additional revenue, certainly in the short term, it also creates measurable economic trade-offs. And specifically, hotel room demand is projected to decline by 10,000 room nights. But the most significant impact is what happens beyond our hotels. When our visitors don't come, spending declines across the local economy. Our restaurant, retail, recreation, transportation, and other visitor-supported businesses, they all feel the effects. And taken together, the analysis estimates a total loss of approximately $15 million in total sales, and also the loss of jobs supported by visitor spending. So I'd like to take a brief perspective of, I've had the privilege of serving as CEO of Visit Santa Barbara for more than 20 years. And during that time, tourism has always remained one of the city's most reliable economic engines. We support small businesses, sustain thousands of jobs, and really help fund essential city services that benefit all of our residents. At its core, this is really a conversation about protecting a proven revenue-generating sector. Tourism and hospitality are deeply connected to our workforce and our small business community. My hope is as you move forward, the city will consider approaches that preserve Santa Barbara's competitiveness and support long-term economic stability rather than policies that risk weakening an industry that has consistently delivered value to this community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. There's nobody else in chambers. Is there anybody online who wishes to speak?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
We will close public comment and now open it up to my colleagues for questions, comments. Combine them all. Member Harmon, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Thank you very much for doing this work, presenting it. I really appreciate it. I'll just start with a couple of questions. First, and I know we've sort of spoken about this offline a little bit, but I still have concerns. On the slide that noted, and I know we were talking about getting to 2/3, but this sort of total yes and total no for TOT versus property transfer tax and how that drops following an organized opposition campaign, I guess that's 20 and 21. I still have concerns, and I guess maybe I'll start with a foregrounding question. The city cannot advocate for these measures itself, correct?
That's correct. But what we can do is, and what I think the polling shows is there's unfamiliarity with what the real property transfer tax is. So what the city can do is we could, for example, send an informational flyer to households in Santa Barbara that explains the real property transfer tax, the city's budget situation, but doesn't advocate so there's a way to share the information. And so that is kind of what we're suggesting that we would do over the next couple of months, is do some of that outreach, the explanation of what it is. For example, the way the question was worded, for a $3 million home sale, this increase in real property transfer tax would result in a $28,000 fee being paid during the sale of that home. So even just information about that and sort of what that impact is, that can all be shared by the city. And so I think that what was promising to us as a staff was that when you give information about who it applies to, how much it is, that the yes vote significantly goes up. And there's still a very high number of undecided voters that, because I think they don't know what it is. And I think that's where the information over the coming months would be useful.
Yeah, I think that point is very well taken. Where I'm concerned, and I guess where I'm wondering sort of how we might handle this, is that all makes sense. But then let's say we get to the point where we really can't advocate for it, and it comes sort of at the same moment that organized opposition is coming into being, and like this 61 to 50% drop is big, and we are not really, I mean, I guess I as an individual could be out advocating, but like, do we have a plan to counter that? Have we thought about what the opposition might look like? I mean, this drop is really concerning, and anytime I don't have capacity to hold tightly to something myself, I just worry, I worry about what that might look like. So can you speak a little bit about what we anticipate the opposition being, why this drop, if we truly think it's a matter of people not knowing, so opposition takes root quickly, and then also, like, what's our plan for getting somebody to run this, especially if it is a general tax where specific interest groups are not running it per se?
I mean, obviously, I want to be careful about talking about sort of campaign-related
Yeah.
issues, but I mean, I think that is part of the conversation
Okay.
this spring are there interest groups that would be able to take the ball and run with it and continue, the campaigning or effort after, the city can no longer provide that information. And I think, obviously, I think having conversations with the realtors, and I think that would be, having run a similar tax measure in another community, that was the primary source of opposition.
Yeah.
So conversation with the realtors about what this means and how it impacts that. And so I think those would be the conversations we would have in the next month or two.
And would we be, sorry, I think you addressed this, but I'm not totally clear on the mechanics. So if we move forward and do this sort of early, purely informational, non-campaign related campaign effort, would we then do another poll, and if it's not looking good, we don't put it on the ballot? I mean, I guess I'm also concerned about overwhelming folks with measures if we don't see a path to success, because I do see how important this is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would behoove us to do a tracking poll
Okay.
before we come back to council with a formal recommendation.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's helpful. And then, so I want to follow up on a point that Mr. Fredericks made around not allocating financial resources in sort of an ad hoc way. I forgot the word you used, but really better defining those allocations. And I'm wondering if there's a way to do that in a general tax, and how are we sort of thinking through threading the needle?
There's a number of different ways you can do that. And I think, I've seen it successfully done where, in addition to the council adopting a resolution to put a measure on the ballot, there is a separate action by the council that basically adopts a political promise, or a resolution that says, here's how we would propose the budget for this measure would be spent. And that would be the accountability, and it would be very specific, like, this service, this anticipated amount, and then, having some other language in there. If the revenue drops below the anticipated amount, what do we do then? And it really is kind of an adopted spending plan. Obviously, we'd want to leave some language in there that says this is, obviously recognizing this is a general tax, we'd work closely with the city attorney's office to craft something like that. But I have seen that been done successfully with sales tax measures and other general tax measures where the council sort of simultaneously adopted solid spending plan or a budget. And I think that is what I see as part of the conversation with some of our housing stakeholder groups to see if there is a way to, sort of reassure those groups that funding will go to housing while also helping support the general fund. And, what does that look like?
Great. Thank you. That's super helpful. And then one final question, and then I'll jump to very brief comments. And a comment and a question. Mr. Nagadykes, I really appreciate the study that you referenced, and I would love to see a copy of that at some point if that's possible, or if it's something that, my question, maybe I'll put it to staff, or maybe if you have the specific information, if it's okay, Chair, if Mr. Nagadykes comes forward. I'm very sensitive to the reality that our TOT is a critical part of our budget mix. And so, and of course, our hoteliers are beloved members of this community as well. It's not just about the money that they bring in. So I want to be sensitive to that. I also, though, continue to have questions around what the real tangible impact would be to an increase in TOT. And you said a loss of 10,000 visitors. Is that what we've seen in other communities that have 13, 14% TOTs? Is it that they were at X number of visitors and then they passed an increase and it went down to X minus 10,000? Because I guess where I'm struggling is that number seems important, but I don't know what it's benchmarked against. And I'm, in all of my research, have seen that it's quite common in beloved coastal communities to have higher TOTs. I haven't heard from them that they don't have visitors coming. And so I guess what I would love, and maybe you can speak to this now, I don't want to put you on the spot either, so we can talk about it separately. I'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to come up. But I guess what I'm asking, maybe into the ether, if anyone wants to respond, but like, how do we really know that we're going to see that reduction vis-a-vis other communities that have similarly high TOTs? And it seems to me that the numbers would bear out that this would be a much easier lift in terms of passage. And I'm not seeing in other communities that it's had such a deleterious effect. So yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Nagadykes.
Nagadykes, come on up.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize for putting you on the spot.
No worries, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Herman. I think I can answer a few of your questions. I did distribute the full survey to you all last Thursday. I know you got an incredible amount of emails. So I included the full survey as well as an executive summary, and that just provides a lot of the highlights. We worked with a company called Tourism Economics. This is a international research company that does a lot of work for various segments of the hospitality and tourism industry. And I can provide a little bit more analysis of how they got to that 10,000 once I take a look at the full study. I just have the highlights as well, too. But this is a very reputable company. When we first started getting word that you were considering increasing the TOT, we all collectively said this will have a negative impact, but we didn't have the data to support it. So it was so important for us, as we do with everything in terms of marketing and other programs, everything that we do is rooted in data, and we just needed to provide that to you. You made a comment about the TOT rate in other southern or coastal communities. In fact, Santa Barbara right now has one of the highest transient occupancy taxes. When we look at our competitors, such as Newport Beach, and other communities in Orange County, they're actually much lower than Santa Barbara. The higher rates can be found in the gateway cities, which is somewhat what you would expect as well. Los Angeles, San Diego, and also San Francisco, too. So for us, I think the bigger story is how do we continue to nurture our industry, which is clearly one of the strongest economic drivers for the city of Santa Barbara. How can we support it so it generates even more revenues than just a quick TOT increase? And that will help everyone, including our wonderful housing authority and certainly our community members.
Thank you, that's helpful, and I apologize, I didn't see that email, so I
No,
will
no,
make
no,
sure
no,
to
don't worry. I know you
go
get
back and-
tons of emails.
I do, many, many, so thank you. Okay, well, I'll just make my comments. I really appreciate that. I have long felt that we need to give serious consideration to a TOT increase. I mean, I think I remember back in 2019 or 2020, sitting with Ms. Janega Dykes and having this conversation. So I still believe that it's a really important consideration. And I continue to struggle with the immense burden that we place on our residents via taxes, via fees, and the ever-increasing complexity of life without trying to find some balanced way, recognizing that it would need to be balanced, to externalize some of what I think is a very necessary effort to increase our revenue. And I just, I didn't support Measure I, truthfully. I didn't vote for it. And for lots of reasons, I think this is not that. It's certainly, the transfer tax is more pointed or more cabined, which I really appreciate, and I think that is of huge benefit. But I don't, it's still our residents, and I still struggle with just the ever-increasing, it feels to me that I'm constantly saying, yes, I will raise these fees. Yes, I will tax you more. And I just am challenged to do that. And I still believe that there is some, and maybe not raising TOT 4%, maybe it's raising it 2%. I mean, I don't know, and I think I'm going to be outvoted here, so I'm really just making more of a philosophical statement that I wish that there were an opportunity to think more creatively about externalizing those costs. That said, I do appreciate that this tax that we're considering is so cabined and is not universal, and I think that our staff has done a very good job trying to be as measured and limited as possible. That has come through for me in the conversations, and I also appreciate the effort to really try to put in place a clearly defined spending plan. To Mr. Frederick's point, that is so important. I think that was very much lacking in the last effort and was among my many concerns about it. So I really appreciate the work to do that here, and I think that will certainly help me, if not get excited about it, at least maybe get on board. I also strongly support the citizens oversight effort. That is a great idea. Maybe we combine it with Measure C, maybe it's its own, but I think that is hugely valuable. And I really appreciate what that signals, which is an understanding on our part that we are just not sort of willy-nilly throwing out these tax measures. We really do, we are careful, we are measured, we are sober about the implications of what an effort like this is. So I really appreciate that suggestion. And I will vote to move forward staff recommendation, not without some real hesitancy, but I think my hesitancy is more related to my own orientation away from what feels like just an ever-increasing effort to tax, and life just costs so much. So I'm very sensitive to that. But I think that's where I am, and thank you. Thank you, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Member Harmon. Member Santa Maria.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Thank you to our staff. You've all done an incredible job, and I think the polling results show what I think as a community, as a city, we have all been saying for many, many years, is that housing affordability is probably the #1 concern, especially for our workforce. So I have a few questions about the real property transfer tax, and I know our staff mentioned there was some additional information that we could be providing to voters. And there was one piece about that detailed, for example, it was roughly, what, $28,000 for a $3 million home. Is that paid by the seller when they sell or by the buyer when they purchase?
Yes, Committee Member Santa Maria, it's paid by the seller of the property in escrow when the property closes and it transfers ownership.
Okay, thank you. And do we know if that information was provided to those taking the survey?
I don't believe that specific information was provided, but that's an example of information that the city would like to provide on an informational piece when we want to sort of educate the public about the administration, the ins and outs of like how a tax would be implemented.
Okay, that's encouraging, I think, because there's clearly more information that we can provide, and we already saw the jump that we see once we are able to provide some more clarity. I want to go back to something Mr. Fredericks brought up about our housing element requirement number 8 about dedicating a dedicated funding source. Have we as a city identified any other dedicated funding sources for affordable housing so far? Or is there anything in the pipeline right now?
No, I mean, I think the council has appropriated in the budget every year, you know, at least since I've been here, money for affordable housing and a variety of different efforts. You know, that while I think it's tricky to say dedicated funding source in the housing element implementation plan because it's, you know, defining what dedicated means. I think we've committed, you know, the council has fulfilled a promise to put money into the local housing trust fund each budget year. So I think this would be another opportunity to have conversations, as I mentioned, with our housing stakeholders, and if we did something where it was a specified resolution or that the council adopted, you know, that could be a line item in there that says, you know, an annual appropriation to the local housing trust fund that would come from, specifically from this measure's funds.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of the specified resolution, what, if any, accountability measures are there for the voters, essentially, to hold us accountable to that resolution that we made?
So there's a couple ways you can do that. You know, similar to what we've done with Measure C is really holding those funds in a separate fund from the general fund and showing each year the accounting for it, the expenditures, how the money was spent. That could either be done through coming to the council or the finance committee and reporting separately on the expenditure, or, you know, I think for this amount of revenue, having a dedicated oversight committee might not be worth the time and energy and efficiency because it's $5 million a year. I think, you know, there is a way to carve it out to have a specific report on that fund to the council. So I think that's something we would talk about with the housing stakeholders in terms of what would help in terms of making people feel comfortable in terms of accountability with spending, and that would come back as a recommendation to council.
Thank you so much. Were the industries that are impacted by either of these measures consulted? So for example, for the real property tax, was the real estate industry consulted before this came forward?
I have not met with the realtors yet, but that is one of the groups that is on the list to meet with in short order after this conversation. I think we wanted to see where this conversation went, and then sitting down with them and hearing the concerns, and obviously that would be part of staff information gathering. Obviously, Ms. Janega-Dykes and I meet regularly and did have a conversation beforehand about the TOT increase.
Okay, so this, as a city, we did meet with our tourism industry before this. Okay, so yes to tourism, no to real estate. Okay, got it. Okay, I think those are all my questions, so I'll just provide some very brief comments. I think, you know, when Measure I passed, I was not in this seat. I was just a citizen, right? I was just a resident, a voter. And I do remember that the conversations that were out there were truly about this being to help mitigate our affordable housing crisis, and the fact that the workers who in fact prop up our tourism industry and all the other industries in town simply could not afford to live in the city they worked. We see that same sentiment and that urgency resounding in the polls. And I think it was a bit of a whiplash that I heard from community, where it was like we thought as a community, not from the city side, from the community standpoint, they thought it would be one thing, and then it ended up being, you know, more general than we had hoped for. And we understand the differences between a dedicated and a general tax. But regardless, I do think that this is an opportunity for us to work on building that trust with the community and ensuring that we are keeping our promises to what it is that we are dedicating ourselves to do, because I similarly am not necessarily a fan of increasing taxes at anywhere at any time, especially if it's going to put an industry out of business, frankly. Whether you agree with the industry or not, it's not our job to be taxing them out of existence, frankly. So I do take seriously the implications of a TOT in our tourism industry. I skimmed the report that Ms. Janega Dykes shared with us, but I do need to read it in even more detail, because I do think that if at one point a TOT tax is considered, I would like to work hand in hand with our tourism partners, because I think that if we are increasing it, we should take into account the real consequences and the ripple effect that it has on our local economy. And frankly, a real property transfer tax, while of course it is a cost on the seller of the home, it seems to me that it has a more limited ripple effect on the local economy. And I think, to sum it up, I will be supporting our staff recommendation. Very much am in support of if a community or citizens oversight committee is too much, I would strongly encourage an alternative to that is of equal effect. I personally do think that it would be worth having a committee, but if that seems to be, burdensome, we could discuss that later. But some sort of oversight from our community, because we don't want to continue raising taxes and promising that it'll be for one thing and then, oops, it goes a different way. So really want to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to our voters. And I think, we're in a way sort of obligated to do this because, as Mr. Fredericks pointed out, we are required to find a dedicated, permanent, ongoing funding source for affordable housing, and this could be one step in that direction. Certainly not enough, but a good start. So I will be supporting the staff recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a few follow-up comments. Good discussion, good comments. It has to do with how where we got for the real estate transfer tax. Does that include commercial properties?
Chair Freeman, the way that staff has conducted the analysis to come up with the revenue projections, it does include every property, residential, commercial, every type of property in the city.
And if we were to, because there's slightly a difference there, because one could impact economic development as properties trade or sell and resell for whatever the business is. But if we were to try to generate the same amount of revenue, then that rate would have to be increased onto the residential properties if we excluded commercial?
I think we'd want to do an analysis because I don't think there were that many commercial property transfers. It's mostly residential. So I think we could look at it. I don't know that the rate would have to dramatically change.
Okay, perfect. That's where I was going, because if that was the case, then it would get into where the polling is if you had a significantly higher. But if we could, as we get more information, understand the implications on taking commercial potentially out. I understand there's other implications of having commercial in there that are being felt with similar measures that are taking place down south. So I think it might be prudent to do that in light of challenges that are taking place to other measures like this. In terms of the oversight, it was mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it, but would it be possible to, instead of doing its own independent, similar to Measure C, because Measure C is over, it's close to 35 million. That's a huge investment. This would be closer to 5 million. Would we be able to fold that into the scope of work of the Measure C Oversight Committee and just add it to their scope of work?
That's the purview of the council, and I think could be done relatively easily.
So I think that would be a great way to do it without adding significantly.
Yeah, I think as the council mentioned last Thursday, we're trying to reduce the number of boards and
Yes.
commissions that are staffed by staff members, and so
We're on the same
yes,
page on
thank
that
you.
one. So if we could fold that into the Measure C,
Yes.
plus they will have that expertise and already understanding how that works. So I think that would be a great opportunity to explore. And then, let's see if there was any other, those are generally my questions. So to my comments, One of the things is, I'll start with I appreciate the Housing Authority's comments today, and I did meet with Rob and Lisa discussing this just to try to understand the different options. And it is somewhat disappointing that the polling does indicate it would be extremely difficult to get to the dedicated funding source. With a dedicated funding source, I think the narrative to the public is different because it's not just going into the general fund, it's going towards a specific purpose that is an extremely high priority for the community. But that polling indicates that with opposition that would come out for either one of these measures, it would most likely not pass. And the implications of going down there my gut says that it would, I'll say that, but we can't put measures forward just on a hunch. And the implications of that would be if we don't have the measure, we don't have the additional revenue that would come in, our deficit, Mr. DiMartini mentioned earlier, it would be it's expected to be for fiscal year 27 over $10 million. Our reserves are diminishing as we speak. And so to not have that revenue come in, it would not only impact the service levels for the other priorities such as public safety that are also up there, but our ability to actually strategically and thoughtfully plan for housing until we can get that dedicated funding source. So having it, even though it's not dedicated, would help us get to that plan that we want to achieve for housing development into the local housing trust fund. The other part of it, again, I think Member Santa Maria mentioned, building public trust. I too agree, do not want to have a repeat of Measure I, basically the impacts of what happened later. So there are measures we can take that will tighten it up and rebuild that trust so that we can all come together on it. I think that's very important in light of what had happened in terms of not having as much revenue that could go to housing as we had hoped. We did have some significant challenges within some of our departments that we had to address that year, and it's unfortunate that this last year that they came up at the same time that Measure I came on board. But it is important that we look at what we can do to tighten it up even more within the confines of being a general tax. The other aspect of addressing the budget is, and we are doing this, it's important, is we're not looking at just new fees or taxes. We're looking at organizational efficiencies within the city and how we can really reduce our expenditures. I mean, we just talked about not adding another board and commission or oversight committee. It's not a lot, but it does take away work. So we're trying to be more efficient as an organization, and we need to do that because it's not just the revenue side, but it's the expenditure side that we can do, and there are ways that we have been. And to our credit, we've talked about it, finance came to council. We have over the 200 recommendations that are out there. Some of them are revenue, but some of them are creative ideas, and so we need to continue to explore those as well, because those are going to come in, and those will not, a lot of those will not impact affordability anymore, whatever it is on the community. In terms of the TOT, eventually we should have that conversation, but one of the things is the Business Improvement District tax just came in online a couple of years ago, where they increased it. And that was a big lift by Visit Santa Barbara and increasing that. And so some of the hoteliers are paying more right now for marketing. It goes back into the community. And but let's let that play out rather than hit with another tax. And then there was also at the tourism summit, there are some headwinds with tourism right now, and there's some great unknowns, especially with international travel, which is a significant part of our portfolio of visitors here. So there would be time to have that conversation in the future, and we can really look at how it would impact housing, our tourism industry, but also other things that could benefit the tourism industry at that time. But I think right now, the real estate transfer tax would be the way to really kind of move us in a positive direction. It does have minimal impacts to the average common voter, common resident here. These are properties that would be over $3 million. So just like to get more information. So I'll be supporting the staff recommendation, bringing that back. The last question I have is when we do the additional poll, that would come in kind of the June-ish timeframe. So by then, we will have already basically gone through our whole budget. So can you just speak, Mr. DiMartini, in terms of how we're doing the budget preparation for fiscal year '27? We are not assuming there's even $1 from this measure, correct?
Yes, Chair Friedman, that is correct, and that's similar to how we've budgeted and planned for other tax measures that the city has eventually approved, such as Measure I or Measure C. At the time of the budget process, when we're considering a potential tax measure, we do not budget for the additional revenue from a potential tax measure. It's just not, it's really not appropriate to assume that A, the council's going to vote to put it on the ballot, and B, that it will pass. So we will build the budget, assuming that there is no additional tax revenue. If it does end up passing, the real property transfer tax would take effect on January 1st of 2027, which would be just a half a year, 6 months worth of revenue generation in that fiscal year. So it would be, potentially half, around, $2.5 to $3 million worth, which, depending on what our budget situation is, if we're able to close the gap, that could help close that gap. And then the first full fiscal year of programming would occur in fiscal year 2028. And so that's how we would handle the budget process. And from today, the next step of this process is to bring these poll results to the full city council. That's scheduled for March 3rd. If the city council concurs with the finance committee's recommendation to have staff proceed with exploring the real property transfer tax, we will get going with that sort of community outreach, the public information, meetings and flyers, and all of that work would occur over the next couple of months. And then we would likely conduct a tracking poll in May or June. We would bring the results of the tracking poll along with the outcome and how the public information work went. We would bring that to the full city council again, likely in July, where we will ask you to then consider adopting a resolution to place it on the ballot for November of 2026.
Thank you. That's an important point, that we don't plan on having even $1 of this. So if the tracking poll says it's not worth it to put it on there, then we would be fine in terms of we've prepared our budget without it. So, and then the last question that I had in terms of, I think you might have just answered it. So we could pull, if we don't go forward with it, then we're good to go. And then I think that is all the questions I had. So, there's one other. Oh, I know, Ms. McAdoo, the March 3rd, it's coming to City Council, the recommendation here. If you could reach out to the realtors prior to March 3rd to
Absolutely.
make sure that they are engaged and a lot of their questions and concerns are up, and that could be raised as part of the, at least have that information available to the council discussion. I think that's very important for us at that point, rather than waiting until after the council.
Absolutely.
So with that, is there a motion to approve the staff recommendation to forward this to the full council?
So moved.
It's moved by member Santa Maria, seconded by Councilmember Harmon. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed, abstentions? Passes unanimously by all members present. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.